Imagine two giants standing in a small room filled with gasoline. Each one is holding a lit match. They hate each other, and they want to destroy each other. But they know that if just one of them drops that match, they will both burn. This terrified the entire world for 45 years. We call it the Cold War.
It was a conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union. Democracy versus communism. Capitalism versus control. But unlike World War I or II, the armies of these two superpowers never met directly on the battlefield. Instead, they fought a silent war using spies, propaganda, space rockets, and the constant threat of total annihilation.
It didn't start with hate. In 1945, they were allies. They had just worked together to defeat Hitler and Nazi Germany. Soldiers shook hands and celebrated. But as the dust settled, a difficult question arose. Who would rebuild the world? The Americans wanted freedom and open markets. The Soviets wanted security and state control.
Joseph Stalin, the Soviet leader, was paranoid. He wanted a buffer zone to protect Russia from future attacks, so he took control of Eastern Europe. Poland, Hungary, Romania, one by one, they fell under Soviet grip. Winston Churchill famously said that an iron curtain had descended across the continent. Europe was sliced in half.
The United States saw this expansion and panicked. They believed that communism was like a disease that would spread if left unchecked. President Harry Truman announced a new policy: containment. The goal was simple but dangerous: stop the Soviets from gaining one more inch of land anywhere in the world. To stop communism from looking attractive to starving people, the U.S. launched the Marshall Plan. They sent billions of dollars to rebuild Western Europe. Factories reopened and cities were repaired. It was an act of generosity, but also a strategic move. A happy, fed Europe would stick with America, not Russia. The tension focused on one city, Berlin. Although it was deep inside Soviet territory, the city itself was split. The West controlled one half, the Soviets the other. It became a tiny island of democracy surrounded by a sea of communism. Stalin wanted the Americans out, and in 1948, he made his move. Stalin blocked all roads and trains into West Berlin. He tried to starve the city into submission. But the U.S. and its allies refused to leave. For nearly a year, they flew airplanes day and night, landing every few minutes to bring food, coal, and medicine. It was the Berlin airlift. Stalin realized he couldn't win this staring contest and lifted the blockade. After Berlin, trust was gone. In 1949, the West formed a military club called NATO. The rule was simple: if you attack one of us, you attack all of us. It was a shield against Soviet aggression. The world was now officially locking shields, preparing for a fight that everyone hoped would never come. The Soviets responded by forming their own gang, the Warsaw Pact. Now, millions of soldiers were lined up on either side of the Iron Curtain. Tanks were fueled, and guns were loaded. The world held its breath. But then, the nature of war changed forever. The Soviets tested their first atomic bomb. For a few years, only America had nuclear weapons. That monopoly kept them safe. But when the Soviets exploded their own bomb in 1949, the balance of power shifted. Now, both sides had the power to wipe out cities in a blink. The race was on to build bigger, faster, and deadlier weapons. To make matters worse for the West, China fell to communism in 1949 under Mao Zedong. Suddenly, the most populous nation on Earth was on the Soviet side. In America, fear skyrocketed. It felt like the red tide was taking over the whole world. People began to look for enemies within their own borders. This fear created the Red Scare. Senator Joseph McCarthy claimed that communist spies were everywhere, in the government, in the movies, in schools. People were accused without proof. Lives were ruined. It was a witch hunt, fueled by the terrifying thought that the enemy was already inside the house. The Cold War turned hot in 1950, but not in Russia or America. It happened in Korea.
The communist North invaded the capitalist South. The U.S. rushed in to help the South, and China rushed in to help the North. It was a brutal, bloody proxy war. American soldiers fought Chinese soldiers, while the Soviets supplied the weapons.
For 3 years, they fought back and forth across the peninsula. Millions died, but the border hardly moved. It ended in a stalemate that technically continues to this day. It showed the world that the superpowers were willing to fight, but they would use other countries as their battleground to avoid a direct nuclear war.
While soldiers fought with rifles, scientists fought with physics. The U.S. developed the hydrogen bomb, a weapon 1,000 times more powerful than the one dropped on Japan. The Soviets built one soon after. Humanity had created the ability to extinguish all life on Earth. We called it MAD, mutually assured destruction. The logic of MAD was twisted but effective. Neither side could attack first, because the other side would have just enough time to launch their missiles back before they died. The result would be double suicide. This terrifying balance of terror is actually what kept the peace. No one dared to push the button.
Then, the competition left the Earth. In 1957, the Soviets launched Sputnik, the first artificial satellite. A metal ball the size of a beach ball was beeping over American homes. The U.S. was shocked. If the Soviets could put a ball in space, they could put a nuclear bomb anywhere in America. The space race had begun. The Soviets kept winning. They sent the first living creature, a dog, into orbit. Then, in 1961, Yuri Gagarin became the first human in space. America looked like it was falling behind. The new president, John F. Kennedy, needed a bold move to restore American confidence. He made a promise that seemed impossible.
Kennedy declared that America would land a man on the moon before the decade was out. It wasn't just about science, it was about proving which system was better. If a democracy could achieve the impossible, it would prove that freedom was superior to communism. The engineers went to work.
While looking at the stars, they were also looking at each other's backyards. The U.S. flew U-2 spy planes high over Russia to take pictures. They thought they were invisible. They were wrong. In 1960, the Soviets shot one down and captured the pilot. It was a massive embarrassment and raised tensions to a boiling point.
Back in Berlin, people were fleeing the communist East to the free West by the thousands. It looked bad for the Soviets, so overnight in 1961, they built a wall. Families were separated. People woke up trapped. The Berlin Wall became the physical symbol of the Cold War, a prison wall built to keep people in, not out.
Then, the danger moved to America's doorstep. Rebels in Cuba, led by Fidel Castro, overthrew their government and aligned with the Soviet Union. Cuba is only 90 miles from Florida. Suddenly, the enemy had a base right next to the United States. The CIA tried to invade Cuba and failed miserably. This made Castro even closer to the Soviets. In October 1962, a U-2 plane took photos that froze the blood of American generals. The Soviets were building nuclear missile launch sites in Cuba. These missiles could hit Washington, D.C. in minutes. Kennedy demanded they be removed. The Soviets refused. The world stood on the edge of a cliff. For 13 days, no one knew if the world would end tomorrow. The U.S. Navy surrounded Cuba to stop Soviet ships. It was a blockade. Soviet ships approached the American line. If they crossed, shooting would start, and nuclear missiles would fly. People hoarded food and prayed. It was the closest we ever came to World War III.
At the very last minute, the Soviet ships turned around. A secret deal was made. The Soviets removed their missiles from Cuba, and the U.S. quietly removed their own missiles from Turkey. The world exhaled, but the leaders realized how close they had come to the end. They installed a direct telephone hotline to talk during future crises.
The focus shifted again, this time to the jungles of Vietnam. Like Korea, The North was communist and the South was not. The U.S. believed if Vietnam fell, all of Asia would fall like dominoes. America sent thousands, then hundreds of thousands of troops. But this war was different. There were no front lines. The U.S. had superior firepower, but the North Vietnamese fought a guerrilla war. They used tunnels, traps, and the jungle itself. The Americans bombed and fought for years, but they couldn't break the enemy's will. The Soviet Union and China supplied the North with weapons, bleeding the American military dry without losing a single Russian soldier. Back in the USA, the people turned against the war. It was the first war televised into living rooms. Seeing the body bags and the destruction made Americans question why they were there. Protests erupted. The country was tearing itself apart. Eventually, America had to withdraw. It was a humiliating defeat for the superpower. While the war on the ground was ugly, the race in the sky reached its climax. In 1969, Apollo 11 landed on the moon. Neil Armstrong took that giant leap for mankind. America had won the space race. It was a massive propaganda victory that showed the world that capitalism could reach the stars. In the 1970s, both sides were exhausted. They entered a period called détente, a French word for relaxation. They signed treaties to limit the number of nuclear weapons. They started trading a little. It seemed like the Cold War might just fade away into a peaceful coexistence. But the peace was fragile.
In 1979, the Soviet Union made a fatal mistake. They invaded Afghanistan to prop up a communist government. The U.S. saw an opportunity. They secretly supplied weapons to the Afghan rebels, the Mujahideen. For 10 years, the Soviets fought a losing battle in the mountains. It became their version of Vietnam.
In the 1980s, Ronald Reagan became president. He didn't want to just contain communism, he wanted to defeat it. He called the Soviet Union an evil empire. He increased military spending massively. He proposed a Star Wars missile defense system. He challenged the Soviets to keep up, knowing their economy was failing.
The Soviet Union was rotting from the inside. Their economy was stagnant. People stood in line for hours just to buy bread or toilet paper. The government was spending all its money on the military while its people suffered. They couldn't afford to compete with American technology anymore. The giant was stumbling. A new Soviet leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, realized things had to change. He introduced 2 new words, glasnost, meaning openness, and perestroika, meaning restructuring. He allowed people to criticize the government and tried to fix the economy. He hoped to save communism by reforming it, but he unknowingly opened the floodgates.
In 1986, the Chernobyl nuclear power plant exploded. It was a catastrophe. The Soviet government tried to hide it, but the radiation spread across Europe. It exposed the incompetence and secrecy of the system. It shattered the faith of the Soviet people in their own leaders. The end was near.
Sensing weakness, the countries of Eastern Europe began to rise up. Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, the people demanded freedom. In the past, the Soviets would have sent in the tanks to crush them. But this time, Gorbachev did nothing. He didn't have the money or the will to fight. The Iron Curtain was rusting away.
Reagan stood in West Berlin and challenged Gorbachev directly. He shouted, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." It was a powerful moment. The wall had stood for decades as a scar across the world, but the pressure from the people was becoming unstoppable.
On November 9, 1989, a confused East German official accidentally announced that travel restrictions were lifted. Thousands rushed to the wall. The guards, unsure what to do, opened the gates. People flooded through. They climbed the wall, danced on it, and smashed it with hammers. The symbol of division was gone. After the wall fell, the Soviet Union collapsed at lightning speed. One by one, republics declared independence. The ideology that had terrified the West for half a century evaporated. The cold, hard grip of totalitarianism was broken by the will of ordinary people.
On Christmas Day, 1991, the Soviet flag was lowered from the Kremlin for the last time. The Soviet Union ceased to exist. The Cold War was over. There was no final battle, no nuclear explosion. The United States was left as the world's only superpower.
The war was won, but the cost was staggering. Trillions of dollars were spent. Millions died in proxy wars. The world lived in terror for decades, but humanity had survived its most dangerous adolescent phase without blowing itself up. We learned that peace is hard work, but it is always better than the alternative.
Today, the Cold War is history, but its echoes remain. We still have nuclear weapons. Tensions between nations still exist. The story of the Cold War teaches us the value of diplomacy, the danger of paranoia, and the incredible power of human freedom. We must remember these lessons so we never have to stand in that gasoline room again. The Cold War showed us the darkest and brightest parts of humanity, from the depths of fear to the heights of the moon landing. It shaped the modern world we live in today. It is a story of survival. Thank you for joining us on this journey through history. Understanding our past is the only way to secure our future. Let's hope that the walls of tomorrow are built bridges, not barriers.
If you enjoyed this documentary and want to learn more about the events that shaped our world, please hit that subscribe button. It helps us create more content like this for you.
Don't forget to like this video and leave a comment below. What part of the Cold War fascinates you the most? We love hearing your thoughts. See you in the next video.